Hi, I'm Tess,
Hi, I'm Sarah, and we are.
the Happy Edit Sisters. Happiness isn't just being happy, it's an embodied feeling that starts with how we approach life, our actions, and our mindset. Everyone has a range of emotions, and that's a good thing.
Join us as we dive into what it means to be happy and how we build a foundation for happiness through different lenses.
Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Tess. How are you?
I am very good. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, I'm feeling quite refreshed. We had a lovely weekend in North Wales this weekend and took the girls and Rosa, the dog, up Snowdon. So we kind of got just before the summit because it was snowy and we didn't really know how icy it was. So trying to hold the kids down and the dog didn't necessarily feel like the best idea coming back down in the snow. Going up might have been all right, but coming down maybe not so much. Um, but no, it was lovely. It was really lovely. Rosa was a little bit naughty and pulled out of my hand and decided she was going to go and chase some sheep, which was a little bit embarrassing as we shouting, Rosa! And everyone stopped. It was really busy and everyone just stopped and watched.
Yeah, they're all going, why is this tiny little pug think that she can like herd these sheep? They probably would just turn around and just be like, yeah, go away, shoo.
It started off as one, and then there was like four or five of them that she was chasing down Snowdon, down the hill, like
Oh my
into the
goodness.
fields. Connor ran after her, and then she stopped when she couldn't breathe anymore. She's only obviously little, and then looked round and was like, where's everyone gone? Where's everyone gone?"
Oh, the
People were
adventures of
walking,
Rosa.
people were literally walking past, going, "Look at that pug run!"
Sounds more
Naughty pug.
entertaining than my weekend. It's
How's
been
yours been?
well, it's just we just have crazy storms. And actually I'm just gonna put this out here right now. Like if anyone hears some thunder in the background, that's me. We have had nonstop storms all weekend. Lots of rain, lots of thunder and lightning. It's been pretty impressive, but I'm looking forward to hopefully in the sometime near future having a nice day and not getting
Fingers
drenched every
crossed.
time I leave the house. So on that note, I am so excited for this episode today because we have Michelle Young here with us as our guest. And Michelle Young is one of my own teachers. She is a yoga therapist and a somatic healer. She has an master's in education and curriculum development. And she has created such a wonderful program online through the Mind Vinyasa practice that I'm just so happy to be to be a part of, as I should say. And so Michelle works with yoga therapy, somatics, nutrition, and other modalities of the healing arts. So she has lots of experience in a lot of wonderful ways to support people. And she has been teaching in one capacity or another for almost 20 years. So she's very passionate about what she does and very good at, connecting with others and teaching that. So I'm so happy to have you here, Michelle, and just have you share your wisdom with us.
Well, thank you so much, Tess and Sarah, for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So Michelle, can you just give us a little bit more of a background on you, just to give maybe something a little extra that I didn't mention in my intro?
Yeah. I think that a lot of my work comes out of my adolescence, actually. So, I grew up, in America. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia for most of my life. Then we moved back to Texas, and that move precipitated illness. My mother was diagnosed with cancer at that point. And I think that during that time, I really disconnected from not only from myself but from others. There was just a lot of it's so interesting how we think that we are connecting with others, through some activities or social engagements, whatnot. But really, in doing that, it was almost like I was masking connection. And so, obviously, I didn't know this at 16. She died when I was 17, and then my father died about 21 months after that. So I was sort of thrust into adulthood very early. And I bought into a lot of beliefs about what it was supposed to look like to be human, to be, a woman in America, to be a human being. And really, none of those beliefs are real, So I spent a good chunk of my 20s and 30s, trying to figure out, why it was so challenging to be like fully present when I was with my children or my family, these things that I did that I thought I needed to do to be human, right? And really found out, in my mid 30s that it was an embodiment issue, that I had like disembodied in a way. And so I had been practicing mindfulness. I'd been teaching, doing all the things. Mindfulness was a huge part of my child raising experience. And we actually did what I call projection-free parenting, which was a great opportunity to really start that embodiment practice, because you have to think, oh, I'm about to tell my child they should do something, but why am I telling them they should do anything, right? So that was sort of the beginning of it. And as I continued to grow and I continued my education, I got really, really passionate about yoga as not only a spiritual practice, but a practice of embodiment. And then continued to add on with all of these other modalities, and explore different teachers. I have, three of my most influential teachers really have informed, almost, all of my work, with the exception of the original program that I wrote, the 200 hour. But even that 200 hour was really inspired by some of what I experienced as an adolescent in, American school systems, really, and trying to heal from that, and wanting to give that gift to others so that they too could start that process. So yeah, I think that ultimately it's not a destination, it's a journey, and it's never ending. As long as you're embodied in this experience, there's some karmic work to do. And I love that about the human experience. But I definitely feel like the practices that I found within yoga and Ayurveda and somatics, breath work, have really, really helped me to experience embodiment in a holistic way that allows me to access authenticity, when I don't know that I would have really been able to do that if I had stayed in that sort of like cognitive place where I think a lot of people live, in this, very sort of like cognitive area. So yeah, I'm really passionate about it.
Yeah. I mean, that's obvious, right? Like you like talk about with so much passion this that you're working in. And I'm curious, you're talking about um sort of this cognitive space, and this podcast is about happiness. So to you, what is happiness? Is happiness part of that cognition, or is it more of an embodiment feeling? Like what does that mean to you?
Yeah,
Happiness.
I actually read a quote yesterday about happiness, and specifically about love. And it said it's not in the compassion or um, like the joy, it's in being. And I think that happiness for me is being. We talk a lot in yoga about bliss, and people, I think, get very confused. They think bliss is like euphoria. But to me, bliss is being. It's being awareness, being present with everything that is arising, and not needing to change anything to achieve that connection to bliss, right? So it's more of a contentment, than it is like an elation. And it's more sustainable. It's less like an ebb and flow and more of a sort of always in the background, always present experience, right? And I think that sometimes, when we get into that cognitive mind and we start, falling into anxiety or into depression, it's really it's fear, it's rumination, it's a lot of forward thinking or past thinking, but it's not a lot of present experience, right? So I think that finding that space that we all possess where you can be, I think is really quintessential to achieving happiness and sustaining that happiness.
That sounds amazing. And yeah, I completely agree. So as a therapist and cognitive behavioral therapist as well, that quite often we everyone thinks that cognitive behavioral therapy is about like cognitions and sitting with your thoughts. And it's not really, it's about being able to access those emotions and those physical feelings as well. And which is really important because quite often I'll talk to people about like kind of coming back from the head and kind of going back into the body and seeing how that feels and being able to sit in that feeling, sit within that emotion and which people find really, really hard, but it's really, really powerful at the same time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, again, I think that it sort of blends into a lot of the philosophy that I teach, but this idea that, we're going to experience pain, but to allow it to be suffering is, really optional, right? So if I am attached to a certain outcome or a certain experience or what have you, then that attachment will precipitate suffering, in the pain.
Mm.
But I can be with pain without being attached to it. And I think a lot of yana yogis, and that's what I practice most in my personal practice is yana yoga. It's much more about learning how to be with what arises and stay in that state of being, where there isn't a huge fluctuation between the positive and the negative. It's more of this is part of the experience.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's really interesting that idea, right? That we can come from these seemingly very different backgrounds, right? Like CBT therapy, Yana yoga, but then in the essence of them, they're all very similar. And to me, I find that really interesting because it's coming back to the body. It's coming back into that awareness of what is arising, allowing it to happen, not being sucked into in those negative cycles that we can get sucked into, right? And to me, like I know that this is something that I've been really working with as well because I struggle or have struggled for many years with anxiety, and that's very much going into that brain space, right? Just going in those negative cycles, and when I'm back in my body, I'm like, oh, okay, no, like I can sit with it a little bit longer. I can release that. And so this is kind of what we were wanting to talk to you about today, Michelle, because we're this season we're talking a lot about our senses and using our senses to really support our well-being, our holistic well-being, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And so it's sort of interesting that from all these different modalities, right, this idea of coming back into that sensation of the body is such an important part of this well-being, of this, sort of editing happiness. So from your perspective, how can we use that awareness to really sort of boost our happiness?
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that I've been working on lately in both the research that I do and the content that I create is, creating sort of a systematic approach to re-embodiment, right? And so and that's part of why I've really been like loving the somatic work that we've been doing, because it really helps to do that, creating space to drop out of that thinking, that cognitive space, and drop into the body, and just drop into the body from a subtle body perspective. What am I feeling in my body? What sensations are present? And then moving into a space where I'm like really using my nervous system to activate senses in the body, sensation in the body. So I call this innervation, right? And so basically, we're using the nervous system to innervate tissues within the body that are both sensory and muscular tissues that are then creating sensation, right? It's similar to some of the work we've been doing with like trauma releasing exercises and stuff like that. And then move from that space into a space of like more stillness, where we can, either whether it is yin, or whether it is restorative, or whether it's just sitting in a comfortable seat, like coming back in and feeling that energy move in the body, and then creating a relationship with the sensation of energy moving in the body, and a felt sense of well-being, right? And I think that helps, and I've worked with a couple different clients specifically with these sort of, I don't want to call it a protocol, but like a series, right, of different practices with different intentionalities behind them. And they're reporting just a sense of lightness, a sense of embodied happiness, right? It goes back to that contentment, that feeling of contentment, well-being, health. And I think that can be really powerful. And the more we start to, for some people, they can access that without doing anything, right? Some people really need practice to be able to develop a connection with that. And then the hope is that they can access that throughout their day and at any time without doing the exercises, or without doing, because they now have a frame of reference for that resource, So I think that's one of the things that I've been using most frequently.
Oh, that sounds so good. It reminded me of, so my supervisor, so he's a systemic supervisor, and I was kind of having a little chat with him about, I think it was about kind of stress within the body and things like that, and feeling pain somewhere. And it reminded me of kind of something that Tess was telling me about kind of identifying an area where there isn't any pain, and kind of then focusing on that area. And he was really excited actually, when I told him, he was like, I'm just going to make a little note of this. So it kind of, what you were just saying, Michelle, then that kind of triggered that memory for me as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, we're a spectrum, right? We're not like just one thing or another thing. And I think so often that when we take this time to come into the body, we realize that, right? We're not just like, oh, I'm feeling back pain today. Okay, my whole body feels back pain, right? Like, no, like maybe in parts of your back you don't feel that pain, right? So it's just like taking that awareness and that time to kind of scroll through, and maybe you don't feel anything at all. And I think that that's something that we don't necessarily, I know when I work with people that's like, oh, I don't like, that's something that people can be really nervous about. Like, well, I don't feel anything. Well, that's part of that awareness, right? Like that's part of that journey of coming back in, especially if we're feeling really disconnected. Like it's recreating those awareness connections of what's happening in the body. And that is that, that spectrum. And something that I I'd like to ask you, Michelle, is like, from a point of view where someone doesn't have any connection with body at all, like what are ways that we can create those connections, that we can start to, create that more embodied experience?
Yeah, I think I've basically started using things that create sensation in the body, right? So if you're working with somebody, and I'll use my son because he's the best example. My son's on the spectrum. My oldest son's on the spectrum, and he either feels like intense sensation or no sensation. And especially when it comes to emotion, he doesn't really feel emotion as sensation in the body, right? And so, with somebody like John, I would be really working with him to, feel sensation. What is sensation? Like for example, he feels pain. He's a very tall, large man. He's like 6'3", 300 pounds. And so he feels pain in his body, So, what would it feel like to feel comfort in his body? So, taking him to like that opposite. So whether that's getting him in his bed with his cozy blankets, with, and can he like really identify and feel what the opposite of, his feeling of pain is, right? So I think you have to sometimes you have to use what they do feel as an anchor, and then start to work, with the opposite, and then start to bring in, well, if you felt, happy, where would that be in the body? There are occasions, though, as we've talked about before in class, where the individual does not have connection to their interoceptive system. So if they are lacking that connection and interoception, I think that the best thing that you can do is start to give them anchors that create physical sensation that's safe and contained, right? So again, using rebounding practices like, yin, or different like props to create compression or to intensify sensation, different adjustments that would, leverage the sensation of touch and pressure to create sensation in the body, and then have them move through. If there aren't any thoughts or emotions attached to that, can they at least identify the sensation, and what is the opposite of that sensation? So starting to play with those types of things, and also recognizing that we are a spectrum, and some people are going to feel things very intensely, and some people are not going to feel them as intensely. But that doesn't mean that they're broken. It's just a different way of experiencing the world.
Reminded me then of so I used to work as a support worker, and I worked with some young people who had quite complex mental health, but also physical health and learning disabilities. And I worked with one young man who was non-verbal. He had autism, but quite a lot of other complex health around him as well. And he loved a weighted blanket. He loved the sensation of a weighted blanket. And he actually had arm splints as well because he'd hit himself, but he actually loved the sensation, although there is risk around wearing arm splints. He likes that sensation of being restricted, and it calmed him down. So it reminded me of that, Michelle, as well.
Yeah, that swaddling, I think, and we are, it sort of goes back to somatics, but it also goes back to like the importance of touch, right? Because that is something that naturally soothes us as humans. I can't imagine putting my brand new puppy into a swaddle, but like a human baby once, many times, not all the time, but many times, they like and benefit from swaddling. And we know this because it calms them, it soothes them, it helps them to feel contained. And I think that, gosh, if you think about it, spending 9 months in, a contained, warm incubator, and then coming out into this world where it, can at times feel like there are no borders and boundaries. If you're this tiny little sensory being and you don't really have a cognitive awareness of, oh, that's a dog or that's a cat, you really are your environment, like that's the perception. And until you develop identity, you are an extension of the environment, just like the table or the chair. You're just part of the whole, right? And so I think that can be super overwhelming, and especially for those kiddos that are on the spectrum. And it makes total sense. And even a lot of our mental health. I think about, I worked in mental health and eating recovery for a long time, and we had a lot of issues with cutting or with different forms of self-harm. And I think more often than not, it's not so much about the harming as much as it is about the feeling, coming back into feeling. So giving people opportunities to feel, and again, even those of us who maybe have never gone to that extreme, but are feeling a sense of loneliness or sadness or disconnection because there's a lack of feeling or a disconnection from that embodied feeling. I think coming in and providing people with tools that they can use on a daily basis, anywhere they are, I think is really, really helpful. So, there's several, tools that I'm using like every single day. Just, when I need to re-embody, when there is too much going on, when I do get overwhelmed, because it happens, it's natural. We all experience anxiety and depression to some level throughout, any given week or month. But I think that some of these tools really are very, very helpful at, regulating and soothing the nervous system, which, helps to get us all back on track.
That was made me think of during COVID. I mean, okay, so during COVID here in Spain, we were shut inside for months at a time, didn't see people. And then eventually we were let out, but only for like a brief moment during the day. And everyone in your sort of age group was let out at the same time. And I live in a city, so we we all kind of congregated in the same places. And it wasn't really, we it was, for me at least, it was very overstimulating because there was just we went from not seeing anyone at all to, when we were able to go out, seeing way too many people, in my personal opinion, at one time. And so one of the things that I felt really comforting actually during that time was having a nice sort of warm sweater on, or some, like, just something that was heavy wearing out outside. And it wasn't necessarily cold out, like when we were going out. It was just like, I found that super comforting to have that, that sort of the idea, that swathing of like feeling like I was being sort of tucked in, even though I'm being surrounded by lots of people. And at the same time, like, it's nice going outside, but also having that space and having that protection still. Um, and I hadn't really thought of it in that way, but often when we went out, I would wear like, something that was quite heavy and weighted. Um, and probably for that reason, because it was just very comforting to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose being a therapist, I'd kind of automatically go back to cognitions. Quite a cognitive, as Tess had kind of felt, quite a cognitive person. But, actually, the more I've developed as a therapist and kind of learning different modalities, with trauma therapy, one of the things that we would do initially before we can maybe kind of explore those thoughts and what that experience of the trauma was, we would kind of do that anchoring that you described, and kind of, I suppose we'd call it regulating. So we'd engage in that regulating kind of practice before we'd even look at those cognitions. Um, so me and Tess talk about it all the time, like what Tess said before about how the world kind of is all interlinked, and yeah.
Michelle, I'm curious, when in moments where you've how do I want to say this?
Mm.
Um, do you notice more of a disconnect with yourself when you're maybe in moments that you realize you're not maybe in the best space mentally? Do you notice like that physical disconnect, or do you feel like, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah. No, I feel like for me, when I am activated by something that it usually is, it's usually related to a messenger of like being bound by something, like being limited in some way. Then I sort of move into what I would call thinking mode, right? And I get very cognitive about it. I start, numbers play a huge role in it. I was a long time ago, I was diagnosed with OCD. So when I have these activating episodes, I go to calculating numbers and making sure that I have enough. And it's very much directly related to this feeling of being bound by time, space, money, whatever it is. And what I've noticed is it's usually attachments. For me personally, there's an attachment to, it goes back to these shoulds, right? And as much as I would love to say there aren't any shoulds in the world, sometimes we work ourselves into a should, right? And so I think that, like in my situation, running a business and having employees and having students and things like that, there are a fair amount of shoulds that I have that are part of the role, right? I should be fiscally responsible. I should be, because it's not just me. I'm looking out for many people. So those things, if I feel like I'm activated, like it feels like imbalanced in some way, then that will activate me into more cognitive space. And I really do have to really come back. I used to say this in teacher training all the time. I don't say it so much anymore, but if you're looking at physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual, we're only one part physical, right? And so we tend to go to that intellectual, emotional, spiritual place. And when there is, an existential crisis, it's all cognitive, very rarely is it physical in nature. And so I think that I have to, come back into my body. I have to, sometimes I'll just, literally get up in the morning. I'll wake up, I'm not even out of bed, and I'll just wrap my arms around myself and like, it's okay, it's fine. Like, this is just part of the experience. Everything's going great. Just take a deep breath, and that really does help me to reframe and to reset mentally so that I can be grounded for all of the people that I'm serving. So I think that is super important, but that's when I notice it the most.
I can totally understand that. I think that, yeah, for me, I have a lot of similar aspects of, like, if I get into that point where I'm just constantly going over and over and over the thoughts in my head or calculating things, it's like, okay, how can I just remind myself to come back into my person?
Mhm.
Um, and hugs are great for that, man. I love hugs. Whether it's like hugging yourself or just like, hey, friend, give me a hug.
Ah, yeah. No, I think it's super important. I also love the like the somatic breath work that we've been doing where we're actually like, tracing the body. So one of my favorite ones, I think right now, because you can really do it anywhere, is having the hands on top of the thighs, like right at the knees. And as you inhale, bringing the hands up towards the hips. And as you exhale, bringing the hands down towards the knees. So you're creating this like somatic sensation on the palms of the hands in synchronicity with the breath. I think that's super powerful. It really does help you to snap back into the present moment.
That sounds lovely. And in my head, I'm like, oh, I might try that.
Yeah, give it a try. I think it's really easy, and it's something that helps, to you think about it and like, well, just that sensation of like a gentle, rubbing of, my arms or my legs. It's very comforting and very soothing. and as a species, we do that to comfort and soothe children, loved ones, pets, etc. Why not do that to ourselves? Like, it's so interesting to me how we do for others in ways, and oftentimes do not apply those same concepts to ourselves.
Yeah.
So true.
Definitely all the time.
One thing that I find that is always a good reminder for me, and something that has been coming up in the yoga therapy courses lately, is like it doesn't have to be complicated, right? Like the best things for us usually aren't the complicated things. Like we don't have to go out and get these special things. We don't have to spend all this time and money on lots of things. I mean, they can be great, but like these little small practices can be hugely beneficial. And the more that we do them, the more that we integrate these little tiny moments of pause for ourselves, then, the better we're able to function in everything. And I think that that is just such a good reminder of, we like to be in that cognitive space. We like to complicate things, right? Like we like to add on and add on and add on. And the reality is that sometimes the simple things are the best things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we want people to be able to like do the thing, right? I think that has been a challenge and especially working in clinical settings and working with psychotherapists and doctors and nurses, and trying to get people to actually do the thing that helps them to shift their behavior is can be challenging, and especially if it's, skills practice. I find that a lot. We have, it's similar to skills practice in our trainings, but it's, directly related to svadhyaya, which is self-study. And from a yogic perspective, like we don't facilitate that processing, but we use tools found within, the sutras to facilitate that. It's, I would call it more metacognitive practice of like I am thinking about what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, and how it's influencing my behaviors. And I think that that can be really overwhelming for people. And whereas some of us love it and it's been like a key to awakening, other people I think can find it to be confusing, and they really need somebody to steward them through it, which is again where I think cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, those types of interventions are really important. But I think from a yoga therapy, somatics perspective, giving people just small breadcrumbs. That's what my first teacher used to say: give them breadcrumbs, just enough that they can integrate into their life and start to, develop and curate their own regulatory practices. That creates a relationship with their experience that is more embodied, that helps to inform, that self-soothing co-regulation mechanism of the nervous system. And then over time, the idea is that people really sort of like they see, oh, this expands my window of tolerance, so I can do those other things, so I can work through some of this other material. And I think that's really important, because otherwise, we end up looping in these behaviors, and we just perpetuate, the attachments that we have and the way that they influence us as humans. So I think it's really important to have small practices.
Yeah, we have to build that foundation, don't we? And like scaffold our way through.
Absolutely.
So, Michelle, at the end of all of the episodes, we like to ask our guests to offer a little happy edit tool, a tool that, the listeners can take out into their daily lives and, maybe just use one small practice, as we were talking about, to really see if that can edit their own happiness this week. Do you have any
Yeah.
suggestions?
Yeah, I think that, well, I have two. I think the first one would be that somatic breathing, right? So bringing the hands to the legs or the arms even, and inhaling one way, exhaling the other, just creating, again, that relationship with the breath and the body through touch. I think that can be really, really powerful. And there's so many different ways that you can do that, so that would be one specific way. And then I think the other thing that is a little bit more general would be, anytime there is a lack of happiness, look at the experience, or look at the present moment, and consider the opposite. So whatever that is, maybe I have a deadline that I haven't met, or I'm not going to meet, right, for whatever reason, and it's causing me a little bit of frustration or dis-ease. Well, what might that opposite be? Is it that I am able to do it, or maybe I never had the opportunity to do it? Like a lot of times that just considering the opposite will help us to like balance a little bit. So those are the two suggestions that I would recommend. It brings gratitude in a lot too.
Oh, definitely. I'm gonna give those a try later. I'm kind of quite looking forward to doing the breathing actually.
Yeah.
They're great. They're great. I personally use those in my practice, and I know how wonderful that they can be. So we would love to hear from the listeners. If you do add these things in during the week, let us know. Send us a message on Instagram, and send a message to Michelle as well, and let her know how they work for you, because I know they can be super amazing and very, very powerful. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on the call
Yes.
with us today on the podcast. I'd love for you to be able to share where listeners can find you if they want to work with you or learn from you.
Yeah, so you can hop on over to myvinyasapractice.com. We offer tons of self-paced programs for both people who are, interested in for people who are interested. Sorry, my dogs are going crazy, but we offer
You're
programs for
fine.
people who are interested in, deepening their practice, but also for practitioners, either, working in mental health or embodied practices, yoga, massage, etc. So, we have a lot of different things that we offer. And we also have an online clinic if people are looking to work one-on-one with myself or any of the other yoga therapists that we have on staff. That's another way that you can connect with us as well.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. And I really hope that the listeners have enjoyed our conversation as well today. It's been lovely having you on.
Thank you so much for having me on, y'all.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
At the Happy Edit podcast, we're mindful that the podcast is not in replacement of therapy. If you do need further support, please do contact us on our contact details in the show notes. And we're more than happy to offer further support and guidance and direct you to places like the counselling directory or therapy directories. If you do also need further support, we would also recommend you contacting your primary healthcare provider. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you all soon.